What's up, Super Heru family? We made it back in, thanks to Mandolin, I guess her name is. Our operator was able to get the glitch straight, figure out what's going on. So, with no further ado, here we are. Thank you for those people who were able to sit through the time lag, but anything, I guess, worth waiting for is actually, something that hopefully is going to be beneficial to us all. So thank you again for putting up with all of the little things that our friends in low places like to do to throw everybody off the game, you know what I'm saying? So big up to everybody in the chat as well for holding us down and being in there with us, you know what I'm saying? Specifically speaking, tonight is a big night, it's a big night in a sense, overstanding by the fact that, well, let me rephrase. Tonight is very interesting because I had a great conversation earlier with a very conscious and culturally aware Moors, and they were basically corroborating a lot of what it is that we've been talking about or been building towards in Super Heru Radio for all this time, you know what I'm saying? But before we get into that, I want to get into aspects of some of the things that's going down in terms of, current events or whatever. So this big election thing is really coming down, and because the society itself or the government itself is about to go through its ultimate upheaval, we definitely want to be abreast and be aware as to some of the political meanderings that are going around behind that, and what that means for us, like I said, culturally as well as symbolically as people. You know what I mean? A lot is being said and a lot is being done. However, not enough is being done in the proper context by those of us who are actively seeking to reestablish some sort of honor amongst our people. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, we are beset on all sides, literally, by unscrupulous Moors and people who are not really down for the right thing. And I know you've heard me talk about it before or whatever, but the reason why I kind of go in on aspects of this is because our biggest problem, in my opinion, again, brothers and sisters, is us. You know what I mean? We are standing in our own way of our own eventual liberation by continuously creating false or fictitious relations, not only with foreign entities, but by creating fictitious relationships essentially with ourselves. We are one of the only people who have perpetuated a form of self-inflicted dissociative identity disorder. Meaning we are the only people who have put ourselves on the outside of ourselves and only go by what other people say that we are. Now, that's a human flaw. We all know that. But specifically with us, it's a flaw that has been so nationally accepted that this flaw has almost become a fictitious nationality itself. You know what I'm saying? It's almost the disassociation that we feel, or the disenfranchisement we feel when we're around one another. You know what I mean? Or when we're around aspects of our community that's not as, let's say, enlightened as a lot of us would like to be. We are confronted with these images of ourselves in the negative, in the almost ignorant aspect of that, because we have not dealt with why and specifically how we wound up in the situation in the first place. We are still carrying fictitious stories and fictitious histories around with us in our bag and almost can go through it like a play-by-play as to how and why these things happen the way that they did. And none of it is really true. You know what I mean? You have to also understand that when there's elements within your community that are isolating one specific element of your community and is basically trying to make it seem like that is basically the only aspect of what the problems in the community really is. And nobody's talking about self-realization and self-awareness and dealing with the demons and the egos that come from the self, then everybody's perpetuating the same falsehood. You know what I'm saying? Just because we are all melanated don't mean that my melanin operate the same way yours do. And just because we all are claiming to manifest a certain ancestral understanding don't mean that all of us understand our ancestry the same way. And none of us should be ever felt or feel like we're put in a position to have to justify someone else's perspective of what our nationality and who it is we are. There are some black people who, regardless of who or what, they will just never give up the African term. You understand what I'm saying? Because they have identified with it so much that it is the basis of what their identity is. You understand what I'm saying? So those of us in the true political forums understand the context and why that's not necessarily an appellation that deals with you, especially if you're trying to represent yourself as an individual on this side of the world. It creates a situation amongst where we don't really, or we have not really or sorely dealt with the monolithic insecurities and situations that led to our present positioning in the world. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, this lack of superpositioning has put us in a detriment when it comes to actually reunifying elements of ourselves. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to go to that. I know, but it's time. Sorry, guys, I got to put on more down real quick. Don't get up. Sorry about that, guys. I'm off. Get into bed now. So essentially, like I said, guys, it creates a situation where, because we have been dissociated with ourselves, and because we have almost, in a sense, put obstacles between ourselves and our true liberation, we are constantly externalizing our problems by putting it in the context of someone else doing something to us, when really the things that are being done to us are happening from certain elements of the government itself, not necessarily the federal government, but in the quote-unquote state government, states, the state troop, the local PD, the state troopers, the local PD, the sheriffs, and the marshals. Everybody else, when it comes to feds or whatever, they actually are mandated to protect the true and living citizens of the so-called American Republic. Yet the true inhabitants, or the original inhabitants of the so-called American Republic, have reduced themselves by their own appellations and names based upon them trying to solicit foreign jurisdictions to identify themselves with. Now, this did not necessarily happen because this is something that we wanted. Damn it, help you sleep. Move into the bed, okay? I'm on. Just do what I asked you to do. I'm on. So this has, in a sense, crystallized in the form of this disassociation that we have had with the elements of our culture that predate the European incursions into our lands and dominions, into our homes, into our actual bloodlines. Because what we have to start to really take into account, brothers and sisters, is that the bloodline, the so-called genetic wars or whatever that we think is based on race, were not necessarily racial in the instance, because the combatants or the people who were involved in the misunderstanding or in the hostile takeover were both basically representations of both melanated people of different nationalities, you know what I'm saying, as well as different ideologies. So just because it was going down, or we read about this European who comes over here and brings Europeans over here, and then he starts to integrate or whatever, because we believe that all Europeans are Caucasian people in this modern context, we have sorely underestimated our own individual superposition as it pertains to us being lords of the landmass, specifically over here. Because the biggest secret, like I did a lecture yesterday, also peace and big up to everybody that came to our Yakub Crooks and Daggers lecture yesterday at Sophia's Garden. It was really great. Thank everybody for coming out in Yemaya's rain. It is definitely a form of baptism, you know, and I appreciate all the support in terms of what we are building on. But one of the things I talked about yesterday was that right now, if I was to ask any of the listeners, like, okay, name me a king from Africa, you know what I mean? People could tell me a lot of different things, you know what I mean? I asked other people, okay, tell me, give me the name of a king from Kenya, you know, give me a name of a king from China or whatever. But then when I ask you, okay, well, what's the name of the king, or who was the first king of the Cherokee, or who was the first king of the Siskatoon or Siskawatun people, right? Who was the first king of the Peary people, who are now the Blackfoots? Nobody can tell me nothing. And that's a damn shame, because when you really get into it, most of us, in terms of descent-wise, have more direct lineage and descent from, quote-unquote, what they would say is Indian in your family, or whatever, from people being over here than people being from the continent. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with claiming descent from the continent. All I'm saying is that if you are basically an African and you are trying to claim some indigenous aspect here, you cannot, some from the soil like you always been here jurisdiction, you can't do that. An African American is somebody that was technically is born in Africa and has moved to America. Therefore, if you are an African American that was born in America, how could you be born in a place that you ain't never been from and then have that nationality before the American one? How can you be an African American if you were never and have never been to Africa? South African, white South African, is funny, we talk about this. I saw this a little blurb in Huffington Post one time, is that a South African was the first white person over here to be considered an African American, because technically he is more of an African American than a black African American here, because at least he, the Caucasian, the Afrikaner, was born in the continent of Africa. Therefore, Africa, in terms of the quasi word of art, technically denotes his geographic location or affinity, but America represents the base of where he is right now. So that means that anybody that's claiming, like I said, something like an African-American aspect is basically saying that they foreign to this place. Ask yourself this, why they always want you to go back to Africa, yo? How come they never talk to you about the African kings and these people that was already here? How come all of the books that you done read about great kings of Africa, great things in Africa, the African diaspora, all of that, why is it that they're so concern in where and how the Africans migrated out of Africa specifically. And we can go to India, you can go to Dravidia, you can go to Southeast Asia, you can go to any of these places and see people that's darker than you, hair nappier than yours. You know what I'm saying? Nose is thicker than yours. Same phenotype, all of that. But they just may happen to speak Malaysian or something. You got to understand. They want you to believe that everybody, in terms of European conquerors that came over here, Cortez, Columbus, these people, they want you to believe that they basically had the power. Think about this. They want you to believe that these people had the power. These people who were disenfranchised, these people who did not have no land, these people who could not read and write, these people who could not cook their food properly, these people who was dying from dysentery, dysentery and bubonic plague, Black Death and all this other stuff. These people whose greatest king lived in a barn, right? These people who had no jurisdiction, who were under the so-called serfdom or Slavic designation, meaning slave. These people, these are the people that they want you to believe came over here, came over to Africa, came over to Asia, and just locked the whole entire world down in this whole understanding of what it is we perceive to be as white supremacy. When we speak of white supremacy, what we're talking about is a caste system that up until very recently has been identified with a specific cultural phenotype. But prior to it being a cultural and specific physical phenotype of a people, it was more of a caste system that was implemented by people who were not Caucasian. So why are we always in situations where we are giving these people more power than they really got? Don't they call these people the black nobility? But then all of them is white. So, of course, through things like occultism and the mind seeking to make sense out of things that don't make sense, they have created another fictitious nationality where they believe that people are basically starting to turn people into corporations. Now, the thing about that is that just happened to be the practice of His Britannic Majesty. His Britannic Majesty George or Edward or whoever else that came after and whoever else was prior to that, you've got to remember that all of Europe was run by one family. All of Europa was run by one specific family, and that one specific family had offshoots and groupings of families that had subgroupings of families, and then those families, in turn, all kept slaves. But the slaves in Europe were Caucasian people, you understand? As well as those Moors who, in a sense, would not be put in a slavery jurisdiction because they were not Slovenians and they had a different culture. They came out of the traditional, let's say, Moorish or universally black culture. So they didn't have that problem. So they couldn't be put in slavery, but they could be put into they could be put into indentured servitude. And so these indentured servitude Moors were the ones that came over here originally in 1656 under the help of His so-called Britannic Majesty. And in the process of that, were able to set up one of the first corporations in the world, or in the so-called New World, referred to as the Virginia Tobacco Company. So what this basically then means is, remember, back in the days, lay in the bed. It's bedtime, Ahmad. It's bedtime. Lay in the bed. So remember, this is taking place at a specific time in history when the so-called war, or the British East India Company, basically was first founded. What? No math. Lay down. Oh, here you go. Lay down and go to sleep, please, all right? I don't want to hear you again. We'll be here. Your job is to go to sleep. I'll talk it back and lay down and go to sleep, please. basically became the impetus for the change-up, or what I call the change-up. The change-up is when those of us that were dealing with these Caucasoids started to create the breeding program of reinvesting them into the so-called human family. There were certain groups that was with it, certain groups that weren't. Now, in Europa, I should say, there were two main branches of the family. Okay? Now, I'm talking about Moors who are foreign to this jurisdiction now. I'm not talking about the Moors that was already here on this landmass. I'm talking about these Moors that's over there in what they now call in Europe, which we used to call Europa, named after the quote-unquote Canaanite or quote-unquote African goddess, Europa. So, checking my notes, folks. Here we go. There were two main branches of the family as the family was structured in its original sense from, let's say, the beginnings of the Holy Roman Empire, which started around the time of Charlemagne. You know what I mean? But we could say that it goes further back into the ancient world in terms of them allowing the Roman state to be procured under the jurisdiction of the so-called Holy Roman Empire. Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire back in the days of the Roman state was I believe they refer to it as the Ecumenical Congress that resided over everybody in the original Vatican, in the original jurisdiction. These were the people who basically agreed and understood what the Council of Nicaea was going to do. But back then, the Ecumenical Council was consistent of all of the so-called wandering bishops and priests and high priests that were coming back and forth out of the Holy Roman Empire during that period, and were basically going into places like Asia Minor and Palestine and basically using the Roman state to lord over all the quote-unquote Philistines and Mamluks and them people that they would have jurisdiction over. So one of the houses, going all the way back now into, let's say, pseudo-modern terms, let's say around the 12th, let's say between 790 and about 965, what they would say is AD, right? You have the founding of the house, let's say House Ibelin, or Gebelin, or Gebelin, right? So it could be Ibelin, 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 right, or Ibelin, or Gebelin, which is Gehbelin. So these represent the northern tribes that were consolidated around the unifying aspects of the Moorish dominion in the northern tracts of Europa, right? These were also more of the seafaring Moors, you know what I'm saying? So this is dealing with peoples or tribes or clans or tribes that came to be known as the Saxons, the Teutons, the Bavarians, the Prussians, the original Khazarians, the so-called Nordics, Vikings, Umayyad, Ishmaelis, and Hashemites, who after the Crusade became known as the Assassins. Right? Then, the other side of them, you had the House Wells. You had the House of Wells, or what they refer to as the House Yulf, which is spelled Geulphs, right? Now remember, you heard it first, or second, depending on if I said it in a prior show or not. I don't even remember. But anyway, this represented the southern tribes specifically that were consolidated around the root house of Moors that were called the Yulfs, right? That of which the so-called royal families of so-called Europa specifically are founded today. Okay? So this again is the Irish, the Gauls, the Celts, the Franks, the Normans, the so-called Etruscans, which then leads to the Minoans and the Dorians and that, right? And the Albigensians, the Cathars, the Huguenot, and the Hessian. The dynasty, one of the biggest dynasties attached to the youth bloodline would be the Habsburg, which created something, or they had something back in the day called the Hanseatic League. Look into that. So these two basic root tribes, when these two factions began, they were, again, predominantly, phenotypically dark Moors. You know what I'm saying? But because they had this side of the world, they had a preponderance to intermingle with their slaves, you see what I'm saying, and allow certain slaves to become, let's say, what they would call housemakers, which in modern times would basically be Freemasons, you see what I'm saying? It becomes a mean by which gentlemen could be raised up, whereas the basic monarchy and nobility that existed at the time really in those parts of the world was really dealing more with the arbitrary aspects or the draconian aspects of the old decaying Moorish empire. The decaying aspect of the empire basically came due to the predicted global amnesia, you know what I'm saying, that was going to come down in terms of what the Hopis refer to as the Great Sleep, right, or what certain texts refer to as the slumber of the ancient ones, you know. This basically led to the reestablishment of ties that had basically been brought into that perspective. The original Khazarians, since we go to them as well, are a people they called in Russia the what is it called? The Abazis. You can call it Abazis. If you get J.A. Rogers' book Sex and Race, I believe it's volume 2, and you get into the blacks in Russia and Eastern Europe and all of that, they get into the people who existed in the tracks first. Because remember, the Khazarian peoples were the remnants of the enslaved Caucasians that were banished into the hills of Georgia, Russia, way back in, I think, Elijah Muhammad dated as 8,419 BC. So in that, they had been exiled there. And then the people who was put at the foothills or at the steps to keep them locked up in there, you see what I'm saying, were the, excuse me, were the remnants of those blacks that built, or those original peoples that built the Straits of Dardanelles, which are the walls that surround the whole six main hills of the Caucasus. So over the centuries, over the years, these people exist there or live there for some time period, you understand? And as the melanin begins to recede based on the climate or whatever, a lot of them still maintain the deep melaninic hue, which then goes to talk about when we talk about the indigenous or the original people of places like Russia and Belarusia and places like this. Like, think about it. There's so many black and phenotypically, for some people would call it African iconography over in places like Bulgaria and all of that that's just out there. It's just that they want you to believe that the people that's there is the people that was always there, meaning that the Caucasian people that live there now are the ones who built these artifices, but they just happen to build them with faces of thick-lipped, big-nosed, you know what I'm saying, kinky hair, black people around, you know what I'm saying? No, these are people who wound up in these positions based upon them being dutiful servants in their climb into or back into the human family through the ritual specifically of, you know, coming into the context of the ritual of Freemasonry, which again, is the exhibited ritual of us running them into the caves of West Asia. You know what I'm saying? So, around the founding of the so-called Catholic Church, it became a resoluted fact that one day there would be a kingdom or something that would be made specifically for those quote-unquote Caucasians in their employ who, by proving themselves as through letters of marque, as buccaneers, privateers, as escaping, into their own freedom or whatever, and then adopting the ways of whatever Morisco let them come aboard the ship, and so forth and so on. There were no images of these people made in themselves as their own God. So in that, the Catholic Church or the Catholic system was employed to make that happen. But the Catholic system was in direct contravention to a certain group of Moors called the Cathars. And the Cathars, whose color was baby blue, believed in the divinity of Christ as man, where the Catholic Church was trying to idealize Christ because it was now being reworked, because ever since the Nicene Creed, it was decreed that these people was going to have some sort of God or something in their image, because, this was the time that they were basically coming into it. But this whole understanding is only being perpetuated by certain members or certain groups within the whole European family structure, you understand? Not everybody's with it. So to shield that, what they do is they try to find a place that's within the jurisdiction or within one of the dominions that they could put them where they could, have something and kind of study how they would proceed. So the corporatization, the corporate rendering of humanity had to be brought forth for people who were not at the time necessarily considered human, because again they were under a universal slavery system. So imagine like in the South how they said that if you could go to a certain place you would be a slave, and then people try to bag you up or whatever. So while that was going on, or while that's going on, what's really going on is that Caucasian people who are seen as quote-unquote Christians or Circassians internationally, or Slovaks or Serbs or whatever internationally, are seen on the high seas as fetching high prices. So no matter where they go, anywhere they go in the old world, they're getting bagged up and thrown into slavery. So some of these people who were getting blown up to slavery were actually white folk who were raised up by some of these European old Holy Roman Emperor, Holy Roman people, families. So as these ransoms or whatever was being paid to get these white people free, this again creates more of the universal animosity within the quote-unquote Caucasian, it's a universal mind state, because these Moors are becoming more and more draconian in how they are controlling everybody. So, again, when the Moors in Granada wind up getting expelled, instead of going to somewhere else or whatever, they just chose to take over the Songhai Moorish Empire and then got rid of the Songhai Moors. So when the Songhai Moors got displaced, they started moving further into the continent and displacing these other Moors. So everybody started basically flipping everybody else up. Everybody started moving in on everybody else's territory between the years of, let's say, 1666 and 1774. So the expulsions, the mass migrations, the wars, and all of this stuff in the old world start trickling over here now, because remember in 1666 they set up the first corporation, or 1667 they set up the Virginia Tobacco Company, which then itself is a business that the British want to get in before everybody else. So what this basically means is that this whole process of integration and denationalization becomes a practice of Moors and so-called remnant powers as they start their own push to come into the dominions that were in league, and the dominions over here that were in league with certain families and certain nations of that area. So it wasn't like the entire British nation made a deal with the so-called Old Dominion, Algonquin Confederacy, Iroquois Confederacy, whatever you want to call it, Monarchy Confederacy. But what they would do is they would deal with them as sovereigns. Sovereigns with a A after the R instead of the E. I learned that from a good brother, Moore, who's brilliant, and also created a system by which one individual would speak, or because he had dominion or the power was vested in him, he would then decide how the dominions would be distributed, or in league or in contravention to the so-called king he was dealing with. So thereby the treaty of peace and friendship between the Emperor of Morocco and Britain was not in regard to Britain as a whole. It was in regard to the monarchs as speaking to each other, because it says on behalf of His Britannic Majesty, who is George. So what that then means is that George was just talking to his cousin, basically, you know what I mean, who happened to be Muslim, Mohammed ibn Abdullah, the great governor of the world, as listed in the Articles of Federation. It was between them. And therefore, anybody who fell under that was a subject to one of them. Thereby, the original Moors of Alamarcanos over here were not necessarily under his jurisdiction. There were segments of the land due to the familiar affiliation that was connected to him in that sense, that he then had jurisdiction over it, if it then was people populated by peoples that was from his original dominion, but that still then makes them, let's say, indigenous and not original. So when Granada fell, all of the dominions that Granada had over here then fell to what Granada was now becoming, which was Spain. You see what I'm saying? So when we talk about Spain, we're not talking in that we have to delineate what was happening. It was the Morisco side of the family going against the traditionally Moorish side of the family in terms of Moorish habit and Islamic and Hebrew writing, whereas the Morisco Franciscan Moors, they were more of the opposite. And so in the discussion of that, these monarchs who were of the same family began to make agreements and treaties based upon their need to extend their jurisdiction and get in on the tobacco trade and the coffee trade that we had the lock on over here. Remember, we dealt with weed, which is hemp, tobacco, coffee, and tobacco, and like fur. They dealt with tea, hashish, and hashish, tea, and was something else that it was really into. with hashish tea, and something else, corporations. So we didn't deal with corporate tax and corporate policy like that because we were of and for and by the soil. So we, from time immemorial, had a structure that was governed under what we preserve as the Great Law of Guyanashua, also known as the Great Law of Ma'at. So Guyanashua, as characterized as you had in Kemet, where you had the story of Aseer, and Heru, you had over here Hiawatha, or I should say, where you had Sept and Aseer. Over here you had Hiawatha and Degandalada. And so, because most of the true ancient stuff started over here, what we have to look at is what we perceive as the beginning of the Old Kingdom, or the Old Kingdom dynasty of Kemet. In actuality, what we are really talking about is that aspect of the dynasty or that civilization was really the end of the super advanced high civilization that existed in places over here, like in the Temple of Isis over here in Grand Canyon, and the Temple of Ra, or the Temple of the Sun in Arizona. So because we had a lot of the ancient super spiritual stuff and organic technology stuff over here, a lot of that was kept preserved by those of us who kept the bloodlines going here. But around, like I said, between the 7th and the 17th century, you get a now preponderance of energy now trying to come over here and get us to adopt the ways that they was dealing with, and using color and slaves as a means of three-card money in the situation. Basically coming over and say that I can come over here and make a business and provide you an income tax. And that income tax that I make off my slaves, I can pay you and I can pay the person who sent me over here, and I can live a good life. And then I say, okay, but what you don't tell me is that some of these slaves is unruly, some of these slaves is crazy, and then some of them bounce off the plantation and the colony, and they move into the wilderness, and then the people that's already there got to take care of them. So the original Piri, let's say the Blackfoot, got to create this situation for the Puritans and the Pilgrims to learn how to make food and stuff for themselves, because their king is only concerned with making money. So in that, they see a vested interest in us, but they still are lead subjects. They are still subjects to their king, who are the bays, the captains of the colonies, who are telling these Puritan pilgrims or whatever what to do. So some of them escape and go, quote-unquote, native, meaning that they adopt the ways of the original people that they are living amongst, who are giving them asylum. This is where these so-called Mexican Indians and these people is coming from, because they are living their phenotype or their phenocomplexion, you know what I mean, depends on how melanated tribe that they started to exist was at the period that they came. Look at movies like Last Mohicans, Dances with Wolves, those types of Indians that you see in the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. These are the remnants of wild or quote-unquote savage white people who lived amongst us, who were seeking asylum, who after we fell under the redesignation, they gave them the designation Indian, right, and then flipped that to then Native American to then isolate them from, one, giving back the culture that we gave them to us, but then two, punish them for bouncing and being free in the first place, the same way they did to the Jews. If you look at what the white federal United States did and what the Nazis did to the Jews, it was the same thing, because it's the same type of white person who is coming out of this position to specifically, yes, a little bit, so to create a structure to allow this hate to turn into some sort of balance. So in this, we start to perceive that the original contracts and businesses that we had with these people or allowed them to have was now turning into different situations because people that was already outside of that, who already had everything, for whatever reason, chose to go and live amongst the colonies, which then gave them a different jurisdiction than the people, white people, as well as Moorish people who lived on the colonies and the plantation, to or live in plantations and colonies who were under the jurisdiction of George or Louis or Otto or whoever sent them over here to make money for him. So we're related to these people in a sense by descent because just like they talk about Africa, that's how we've talked about Atlantis, because that's really the main continent, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. That's where we was from ancient times up until the certain cataclysm. So the people that was already there, most of them stayed over here, whereas a lot of the other people who were of the other aspect of the bloodline went to the old world. So we're talking about the de-unification of a people that eventually leads to the denationalization and the stewardship of the Sons of Liberty who would become part of the situation. So what became an idea for the monarchy over there was to ease the taxes of their citizens to offset the feeling that the nationality that they had in terms of being a subject to him wasn't as good as the nationality of those of us that was already here. And so they began to try to do things like ease taxes and stuff like that. But because they did not have, or the old world did not have, or the old Moors did not have a order that was connected in some way to the indigenous order over here through the so-called occult or the masonry thing, they needed to find a way to bridge the gap. So the Boston Tea Party is enacted by members of what would be Prince Hall, which would also then be John Belmont, because the Prince Hall and the John Belmont orders, John Belmont split from Prince Hall at a certain time. Members of the Prince Hall thing, Caucasian Freemasons who had to be painted black to look like the American Indians, a.k.a. the original Moors who owned the ships, who also were in charge of the charter that was being put forth. So the idea was to start to foment a thing against taxes. You see what I'm saying? And specifically the tax on tea was something big because, again, over here we drank coffee. You know what I mean? That was a British import that wasn't really making a lot of money at the time. So they needed to find a way to subsidize the British East India Company because, remember, that's who's bringing the tea over here. But the problem, again, is that they don't have a Masonic order that they can use to foment and make deals go through. So, in response, the quote-unquote Freemasonic Caucasian lodges that had a black Grand Master received a charter from, the original African lodge that was initially set up by members of both sides of, let's say, the bloodline, was then recognized or granted by the G7 Lodge, because this gave the G7 Lodge now more credence in America, because during that time people wasn't messing with it, because people was dealing with the original lodges, the Kitwa Society or the False Faith Societies and the things like that that existed from time immemorial, or the totemic societies that came about through the Tekken, a.k.a. totem poles, that was built on the mounds, again, connected to the vibrations or whatever magnetic spectrum of the inner earth. That we over here always had access to, based upon our descendancy from those of us that, again, were the remnants of Mu, Lemuria, Tamawankan, Atlantis, Atlan, and over there, they had another section where a lot of the remnants of the real dark Africans came from a sunken part that existed between South America, Australia, I believe, and Africa, called Kandum Kamari. And this allowed for the integration and the inter-amalgamation of original people who, again, are still going through the generational cycles of the overall Yakubian experiment, which is really at the basis and the center of the disunity and disharmony that's being structured throughout the planet at the time, and being fostered in the fact that we are also going through an amniotic state where we're not cognizant of our real history, because everybody is getting switched up. This is what the Bible talks about in terms of the Tower of Babel being built and everything being broken down. But we have to get out of the concept of us being powerless in our own evolvement. As a regular person, you know there's always signs that something's going to happen when it comes to you and certain people. But most times we always ignore them, especially when money's involved or the promise or prospect of money. And that is the theme, again, that was brought over here by our cousins from these northern and southern tribes, which shows the overall destruction of things in the fact that over here the North and the South went to war. So as the North and South go to war, both sides are people with people who came over here and got into the United States government, which we allowed to be created as an interface between us and everybody else that was coming over here with their problems and everything else. And this way, this would be taken care of. And based on that, we would have something that would always just pay whatever benefits. So all the so-called benefits that people envy Caucasian people in terms of what they feel they get, this has only gotten to them through the status that they erroneously have occurred due to being stewards or descended from stewards who are allowed to run a country and deal with those foreign Moors that were coming over here as denizens and everything else. This is where the controversy of the flags in all of this country. Everything is quasi and not concrete. The idem sonam is really just another way of moving away from the original aspect, because to truly get in context in what we were doing here, like from the ancient times when people was coming over here, they were coming over here to exchange culture. You know what I'm saying? When the people from Ixtec came, or Ixtian came, or the Xiang dynasty came, and they hooked up with the Olmecs and stuff, that's an exchange of culture, a reunification. When Abu Bakari came, after when Mansa Musa came, sent his expedition and all of that, they came and they hooked up with the original people of the so-called civilized tribe. But when they came here, they didn't come here and then conquer the people with them. They interbred in, but the deal was that they did not or could not have say in how, what, and where the affairs of the republic went. That they basically would be in honor of a former place. But if you're here, you got to go with what the Shechem say. The stories of this are then taken back. So by the time Abu Bakari comes over here with the Malian expedition, they start to just hook up with the Sadagi, which eventually become the Cherokee. But in that, the exchange of posts is evident. You see people in Mali to this day in forms of some of the habits and weaving. You look at some of the old Cherokee ways, it's the same thing. And you look at how the Cherokees wear the turbans, it's the same thing. But instead of it being of satin or silk or something like that, it's made of the national hemp or something like that. The same way, if your Cuban mother married your Zimbabwean father, you know what I'm saying? Regardless of what it is, you're the product of Moorish birth. Moorish meaning black. But the status of that is something that has to be acquired based upon the understanding of one's jurisdiction. The jurisdiction of one is based upon one's initial standing. So your place of birth is where you are placed in, therefore, society, not your geographic location. So in the establishment of the so-called federal government, which had its 10 by square zoning on the Potomac and all of that, that was the center for us to come and preside. We allowed this thing to take place in place of us having to always have to function as that. And it was to be people or stewarded by these ex-slaves and POWs who were now seeking a better life and better freedom from the decaying Moorish Empire. So as they had their so-called emperor or sultan and all of that, we had ours in the form of Noble Jew Ali, who himself came and was born in North Carolina on a Cherokee reservation. So ask yourself, how does a Cherokee, a black man on the Cherokee reservation, in the time of rampant Christianity and Negroism, come into the knowledge of Islam, but not the religious Sunni Islam, the true Kufic Islam, going back that predates the religion by over 25,000 years. So the same way, let's say the Rastas look at His Majesty as the Emperor is how we were supposed to have looked at as Noble Jew Ali, which is why they wanted to shut him down, because he was getting everything back, because he understood the course of empire. Yet he was trying to build the empire of Al-Americano, not the old decaying empire that was peopled by barbarous Moors. Barbarous Moors who wanted to force original Moors into false jurisdictions to get money. Yet, to say this is not to say that all that Moors then are evil or bad in some way. This is just history, which is a succession of years, not necessarily the understanding and what happened, because what happened depends upon how you perceive what happened. And if you are looking at what happened as a means to justify something to do today, it has to be in honor. It cannot be to get money. Because the intent is what makes the magic work. So in the accumulation of this, different dynasties come and go. The Almohad, the Almoravid, the Umayyad, right? The Abbasid was so dominant. That's when all of the great aspects of what people perceive as Arabian culture come into existence. And this then becomes the setting for the things like Crusades and all that stuff that happened later, because all of that was just about testing, quote-unquote, Templars, which are really Caucasian Freemason males and females, put into military service to champion Coptic Christianity under the guise of Catholicism. Same way the Haitians used to use the Catholic symbols to shield their true relationship with the Legbars and the other real deities, in the same way where they get it from. So essentially that northern and southern split in the old world, in the old Holy Roman Empire, led to the accumulation, or led to the agreement at the Battle of Tours between Charlemagne and the Moors, and the traditional Moors, that set in play how everything was to happen. If Charlemagne and the Franciscans hated the Moors so much, then why was his crown made by Moors, who again were his cousins? Because again, we're talking about one main family that basically ran everything, and was split up into different groups. And then some of those groups, based upon them being born over in the old world, were more about militaristic and commercial takeover. But the British Moors were more specific and more exacting in their accumulation of corporations, by taking countries and turning them into that, by incorporating countries into the British East India Company and not the so-called Britannic Empire. Britannic Empire, that main goddess is Britannia, Britannia, who really is Baratai, and Baratai is really Baratania, right? And all of that gets into ancient Sumeria and ancient Dravidia, which then was Delhi, which then was Hindustan, which then now is India, which is then split into Pakistan and Bangladesh and India, which is now going to be, Pakistan is going to be split into something else, just like they split the Sudan recently into the north and south with the help of George Clooney. Like, this is the reality of the working of the old world's energy and what this place was always supposed to be. You know more about the old, quote-unquote, world for a reason. And they don't want you to know about the Indian in your family and all of that, because that's leading to the treasure, and that's leading to the 12 tribes of Ben Ishmael, and then that's leading to the Septuagint, and then that's leading to the Lenape and the Wabanake and the Watagan and the Montaka, which is the Montauk, and all of that. So then when we deal with nations that we know of, or that's trying to, work it today, like, like Washita, like, what happened to them is basically what happened to all of us, again, essentially in the sense that once, what nobody's talking about is that once they entered into the marriage of the princess to the Maison de Rouge, that then gave the prince, or Gaul, or Francisca, or France, dominion over the land. So once they decided, or Napoleon decided to do so, they had no way, because they couldn't say no, because again, the Maison de Rouge was still a subject of Napoleon, the Corsican. So once he sold the land, the Maison couldn't do nothing. He had to let it happen. And once that happened, the so-called illegal Louisiana Purchase, what this also did was it put the Washita nations in direct conflict with the revolution and independence of the so-called Haitian Moors and their goal, and Toussaint's, and the unification that they had. So they sent Frederick Douglass down there to seal the deal. Once he took the deal, see what I'm saying, and as the first ambassador to Haiti, to kind of like smooth it out. You know what I'm saying? And in that, then, the so-called nobles of the Washita Nation were then absorbed into that. So when Henry Turner took everybody to court and was winning his own thing, he was doing it as an heir to the throne, right? But it wasn't necessarily the throne that was laying the claim. It was him and his family. Therefore, any legal protection or anything that was brought forth from that could only come from and be presented to them by the family as construed by the United States due to international law. To then take it to a common law venue would then mean that they would then have to go into the original jurisdiction of the so-called Washita nations, which then would have to then go into the so-called Iroquois Confederacy, which is really the basis of the Continental Congress. But that doesn't relate to the fact that once that happened, everybody that was quote-unquote sovereign or had their own way of things fell under the Negro jurisdiction or the nigger jurisdiction of the so-called United States, which again was set up to deal with foreign nations, right? Yet it was there to preserve the original members of the so-called republic, but because the Ductamundia was its own empire, you see what I'm saying? We have to find the documents that connect the Ductamundia Empire with the Iroquois Confederacy in the peopleage of it. Because they may have just been their own section and their own aspect of that, and not a part of the 13-tribe or 13-zone system that was laid out in the 14-state flag, which is also known as the historic flag or the official flag of the so-called United States for America. United States of America is the creation then of the United States, which itself is an artifice that is basically moving without a head because the original republic, i.e. Iroquois, Algonquin, Monacan, whatever, Moorish, whatever head is now functioning in its proper capacity as a individual republic for which it stands. See what I'm saying? Where the continent, North Central South America, or the continental North Central South America, is supposed to be those of us from that is like us in these areas. And every area in Honduras and Belize or, you know what I mean, Guatemala, whatever, these are black people. Just like in Palestine, just like in Bahrain and all these other people that's doing all the work, just as melanated and black, phenotypically black as you. And then in the quote-unquote white strata or Caucasian society, you have the exact mirror of that in the form of the pressures of the socialized, westernized form of getting ahead. And how much self-debasement and exploitation is involved in it. That's all coming from a slavery-based mentality based upon their ancestors languishing for hundreds of years and thousands of years in the dungeons of places like Saleh and in the Rabat under the jurisdiction of the Lord of the Atlas, who is El Glawi Pasha, blessed the dead, a black Moorish empire, Moorish ruler who ruled up until 1946. Some people call him a puppet. In research, I'm still trying to do the knowledge to that. All the research I'm seeing is him basically taking everybody's money, flipping it from Morocco. But the old Morocco, which represented us over here, which is why there was consularies over here that were attached to that were closed down in 1956 and therefore all cases attached to that had to be resolved by 1960. And because the civil rights movement was injected into our overall species evolution to put us off of that, we have now not gotten to the point where we realize that the aspect of that is not putting us where we need to go. And that we are not dishonoring those ancestors that died for civil rights by saying that there was no need for them to die if we would have really understood what was really going on and what was happening to us. So, get into some calls. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, that's cool. So yeah, essentially, like I said, guys, it's gotten to a point where, due to the routine of accumulating knowledge, unless it's put into a cohesive form, right, we're basically just masturbating with it. You know what I mean? And what I'm saying also is that there has to be a unified agreement on a spiritual level, genetic level, whatever, that there has to be a certain people who want to do that. And to think about, okay, what a government structure is, we can look at the one that exists, that our forefathers enabled and erected in such a fashion that it's gotten to the point where it is. As great as it is technologically, we know that it's basically broken. And it's broken because the people who are the most persecuted are the people who are supposed to be on the opposite end of what's going on. And because a lot of original, quote-unquote, sons of liberty and descendants of them understand this, they are in constant fear that we will somehow understand how to tap back into that and therefore put them in the proper capacity of what they're supposed to do. Yet, due to the creation of things also like the Klan and these types of things, these things are the dominant factor of how people perceive race in this country as juxtaposed to white and black. But what's really going on is that there are certain white people who are descended from white people who are enslaved to black people who acted white, who had disagreements with other black people who lived on the land before those black people and their white slaves got there. And in the quarrel, the white slave found a way to enslave them both. So the key to this, again, is honor in how we're supposed to be dealing with each other. And treaties and things like that we're supposed to be working out with each other as opposed to be following with this government. There should be like one day where everybody files, where everybody in the country that's supposed to be down with it files on the same day. Once you do that, the recording aspect of that would probably crash the system. But to do that, you have to have people who are willing to follow that exact momentum and period to do so. But to do that, then, you would have to use form of communication that was not somehow tapped into, because they're listening. You understand? So anything that you say or anything that you put out there on a venue like this is already a wrap. So in that, we have to find another way to communicate in order to really make things happen. And this is why the spirit realm is such a viable opportunity and a viable way of expression in terms of how we perceive interhuman communication. Yet to tap into that, the intuitive nature has to be sanctified, meaning honor has to be the predominant aspect of what it is you're trying to pursue with it. Yet honor, for whatever reason, is different with different people. Because everybody got their price. You understand? Everyone. So it comes to a point where once it's offered, you now are put in a position of obligation. And so you can never really be in an inferior position, yet the inferior position that's on you is imposed essentially by you based upon that. So essentially when the police pull you over, they're basically asking you for identification that relates you to them as a subject. And then when you produce that, if it's theirs, then they have the right to do that. Therefore, whatever you produce to them first is what it is they have to do the knowledge to. You know what I'm saying? So once you present them with your true nationality or with your true, let's say, ID, they have created something to make that then illegal. You see what I'm saying? Always to put you in a default where you have to show and prove why and how you can do that. Whereas it was assumed prior to 1773, you understand, or prior to 1791, it was assumed, again, instead of proving guilty, it was assumed that you were in the right. So the same way that they could show me pictures of white people during the time period whipping and enslaving black people, I've seen pictures of black people doing the same thing to white people. So what does that say? Why is it always juxtaposed between black people and white people? Why did it always come down to something sexual? Why is it always a situation, or why are people who are mixed breed made to feel inferior or inhuman somehow by creating classifications, octoroon, quadroon, mulatto, mulattress, right? Who created that? How could people who didn't know how to write up until really the 1800s, why do you think they revered people like Wilde and Poe and Longfellow and these people? Because these were white people who reached the aspect of where they were known as men of letters. Because the letters that they sent to different people allowed them to learn the structure of the so-called English language that they had inherited from the Britannic Moors who ruled over them, who were now subjugated and put into inferior positions, you understand, based upon their willing amalgamation and Americanization into the New World Order, which was a Franciscan empire of amalgamated Moors who would be allowed to amalgamate freely and genetically come together. One of the earliest symbols of this was the white hand and the black hand shaking hands on the Masonic apron. So there were suborders created like the Brotherhood of Eleusis, where there were quote-unquote rich white males who predominantly dealt or became the patrons of artistic black females to put them in positions of opulence to have babies with them, to then position those babies to then do the same. Yet we don't think these things are true or these things are whatever because they make movies about it. But where do think these movies are coming from? Why do you think Game of Thrones is so interesting? It would be more interesting if the people that you're watching on it were in the phenotype that they were. It would be a whole different show. They can speak the same dialogue, everything they're doing. But when it's black people doing it, it becomes a different thing. But you've never seen that, and you've never seen that for a reason. You understand? Chinese people do constant pageantry. They're constantly in their ancient garb and all of that. Indian people who are calling themselves Native Americans, those people are constantly doing the dances and stuff that they've been taught down by the quote-unquote ancestors or whatever, despite the casino thing and all of that. And they are preserving an aspect of the culture that they are supposed to ancestrally give back to us. But that's why they're on reservations and we're in projects. Because we're under or in a project, a Yacobian experiment that has not reached fruition yet. And because we don't believe it, and because we are caught up in the physical presence, the presence of that, we are now functioning under a different perspective. So, again, brothers and sisters, what this means is that all we have to start to do is unify behind what is dissociated within us. Once you've isolated that and you can unify yourself, you can then begin to work with unity with others. Yet, to make that unity work, you have to be specific. And that means that you got to ask the tough questions. You know what I'm saying? And in that, the response factor is what you use to gauge what it is you do with that person from that point on. But when it comes to us as Moors or original people, we are the ones that are supposed to be out here making treaties and working with each other to create institutions that will manifest what it is we are supposed to be doing. And not getting caught up in the petty ego stuff and all of the crap that people do to throw you off with the main goal. And to slow up what you're doing and to bring unwanted attention. So those of us that are perceiving things from a bird's eye view are at some point disconnected and therefore have to find a way to integrate ourselves into it. Therefore, mediums that you could create to interface with people are great. Anything that you can make and create for yourself that you can put out in commerce and sell, that's really what commerce we initially created it for. A means of it was based on reciprocation, not the money. So the money was given because that's what the foreigner seen that we had. So once he accumulated that, he was able to give it back to us, you understand, as a form of respect. That's why you say thank you when you give somebody money. Why would you say thank you? Shouldn't they be thanking you? But they say thank you after you thank them because that's a ceremonial thing. Just like when you say goodbye, it used to be good day. Or when you say good day, you're saying good day, D-E-Y. You hope it was a good day. People used to hope, it used to be that hectic in some Moorish dominions where, damn, I hope it was a good day. I hope it was a day where this dude is in a good mood because he might just, send me to the lions of the dungeon or whatever. You know what I'm saying? That's how ill it got because we lost spiritual focus. So if we hold on to whatever spiritual focus we're focusing on, we'll be allowed to move forward. I truly believe, or know to be true, based on the fact it hasn't happened yet. Therefore, it can't be untrue. So, with that, we say peace and thank you for dealing with the technical difficulties tonight. We could only be on for a certain amount of time. So, inshallah, it'll be better next Monday night. Thank you for the donations that you've sent and well wishes as well as art. Thank you so much. If you wish to send anything else, you can send it to dukeoftears@gmail.com. But please check out www.thedarkskull418.com and you can check out some of the other stuff we got going on there, as well as www.Aseer, thedukeoftears.com, www.cookingmoralflesh.com, www.blackmambaworkouts.com. Happy birthday to Selena. Her birthday was on the 22nd. Let's pray. And thank you guys for well wishes for that. Also, this month's full moon occurs at 7 degrees of Aries, you know what I'm saying, on September 29th. So during this period, you know, relationships are very important, you know what I mean, and very exciting. You know, you'll have a chance to really observe your feelings and intuitions with people more objectively, and it's a time where balance will be restored into what it is you put or imbalanced in the past. So it's a very good time for correction. It's a good time to notice whether your own life force is, exacerbated or revved up. If not, you need to do things to start to create a more harmonious situation for yourself. You know what I mean? Get into a new environment, expand your horizons, things like that. It's also Virgo in the 6th house. You know what I'm saying? 23-degree Virgo's 37 minutes. So you want to do the knowledge to that and gather the energy for it, you know. So now is a good time. Those people have onyx eggs. You can bury it in the earth around this time to harvest the moon energy on the 29th, the full moon night. And, be well. Also, anybody wants to holler at me for readings, lectures, bookings, musical performances, whatever, email me at houseofel@hotmail.com. All right? Also, the song you heard in the beginning of the show, Super Heru Radio, from the album DS418, the soundtrack mixtape album CD, on iTunes right now. You can check it out. Just under the name Team Cordoba, myself and the Queen, and more. So thank you guys for coming through and supporting and holding us down and dealing with all of the goings on of the haters in the smog talk world. So thank you for tuning in, and inshallah, thank you for tuning in next Monday. Peace.